Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Binary Atlas podcast, where we talk about all things technology. And today we are going to be talking about your home or small business network. We're going to be talking about what all goes into a network at home, how to secure it, best practices, and things like that. Joining me today is the lovely Brandy.
That's right. And just to clarify, when we say network, we mean internet network, not network of people, because, there are some people who may not be familiar with all the terms.
Well, it's a technology podcast, so I guess I assumed people would assume when I say network.
And you know what happens when you assume.
I know. So anyway, we're going to start with the basics. So for people who aren't really familiar, we're going to go over what all parts make up a network in your home. This also is the same basic principles for a business. So the first one is going to be your modem, right? That's going to be the device that hooks to whatever internet line you have coming in, whether that be telephone, coax cable, or fiber from a internet service provider.
Or satellite, correct?
Or satellite from an internet service provider. They're all going to have a modem, which basically connects you to their service. Those modems can be one of two things, right? They could be a straight modem that all it does is bring in the internet. It does nothing else. Or it could be a big combo unit that also puts out your Wi-Fi and has a couple of ports on the back to do hard lines and things like that. The one we have here, we use cable as our internet service provider. And it is a combination modem for us. So it puts out the Wi-Fi signal, has 4 ports in the back if I want to hook up anything hardline. Then it's got the hookup for the coax cable on the back.
Yes, and we actually pay a fee to rent that from our internet service provider because we don't want to have to worry about paying for the equipment and then it not working properly with the service provider. Plus, it gives us that assurance. Recently, our line was struck by lightning and it actually fried our modem. So it was nice to have that peace of mind that they were able to replace it.
Yeah, I always recommend leasing it. Yes, it does add up over time, but you never own the equipment. And in the case of something like that, I don't have to spend, $200 or $300 for a new modem. I can just have them replace it, right? Easy peasy.
And if they do some sort of an update and make it where our old equipment no longer works with their current signal, they are obligated to replace it, and it's not an expense that we have to do.
Yeah. Now, the other two things you can get is called a switch. One of the other two things is called a switch. Now, what a switch is it is a box that has a bunch of RJ45 jacks on it, ports on it, and that's how you run hardline. So if you're not familiar with what a hardline is, if you remember old phone lines and things like that, so there is a, see here, orange, white, orange, blue, white. It's an 8-wire cable that you can run throughout your house. You run it through the walls, through the attic, whatever you need to do to get the lines where you need them. You have a little jack on the wall, and you can plug a internet cable, a category cable from that jack to a port on your computer. Most computers, especially towers, bigger computers, have a port on the back for that. Laptops you sometimes have them. It's getting more standard with these thinner laptops that they don't, and you've got to get an adapter for USB-C or whatever.
Yeah, I've heard those called an Ethernet line. Is that the same thing? And those are different from what you see. Like if you have an older home that has the phone lines, that's going to be a different.
Yeah, there's not as many pairs in a phone line as there are this one.
Gotcha.
You got to have more wire in there to carry the bandwidth of the signal.
Internet signal. And that's more common with like DSL telephone internet? Is that?
No, I mean, so it's not. So what DSL is actually bringing in your internet over the phone line.
Okay, gotcha.
What we're talking about is internal to the house only.
Oh, okay,
cabling,
gotcha.
Right.
So that you can run from a DSL modem or switch or from a cable modem or switch, any kind of switch.
Now, here's the fun part. So, it used to be, 10, 15 years ago, you would say, if you can, run a hard line because it's much, much faster than Wi-Fi, right? So your standard hard line is a 1 gigabit, so 1,000 megabyte line, right? That's the max amount of data. Say if you were downloading something, the max you could do on that line is 1,000, all right? but Wi-Fi was maybe, 100, 200 max that you could do on Wi-Fi. Well, that's changing. Now we've got 5 gigahertz. We've got the new spectrums coming out and stuff like that. So you can actually do past gigabit on Wi-Fi, right? So it's becoming a little less necessary to have hardline. But if you have applications or devices that it is very important that they don't lose connectivity, like say a security camera or an alarm system or something like that, then you want to try to go hardline because Wi-Fi can experience interference, right? There's different sources, things in the environment that can affect Wi-Fi signal. The last thing you want is an important device like a security camera to have not recorded something that was important because you had no signal at the time.
Right. And of course, that only applies if your internet service provider is putting out a good signal, correct? Because if their service goes down, then you're out of service.
Yeah,
no
but we're focusing this on more of the internal aspect. We're not focusing on the external. We're going to assume throughout this podcast
that you have Right.
A little abbreviation for that. So you're going to want to assume that. So that's why the switch is always kind of your starting point, right? Because you're going to need to run a certain amount of hard lines depending on your situation. I can't tell you what that number is because I don't know your particular situation.
Yes. And now is the switch, is that different from the ports that are on the combination modem? Okay.
No, that's the same thing. The only downside to that being on the back of the modem is the number you're limited to.
Okay.
The most I've ever seen one of those units come with is 4. Right. So
if you have a bunch of security cameras or a bunch of need for hardwire, then you would need more than that. So
in our home, our modem has 4, and I have an extra 10-port one sitting there. I run a line from the modem to the 10-port switch so that I can use more than 4 hard lines.
Okay, so you can use both then.
Yes. Yeah, you can use both. The next little piece of equipment you're going to want is a Wi-Fi access point, or an AP is what it's also referred to as. That's what puts out your Wi-Fi signal. Now, like I said at the start, your modem might do this on its own, right? And you might be okay with that. It depends on the size of your home. It depends on what's in your walls in your home. Mm-hmm. Basically, what most people do is they put the router somewhere centrally located or wherever their line is coming in from the ISP.
Okay.
Right?
Now, does that make a difference if it's a 2-story, 3-story home? Versus 1 story?
I can't get into this on this podcast on what goes on because there's so many things that affect Wi-Fi signal. There are the materials used in the walls, right? Mm-hmm. In the construction, the type of insulation you have, the type of wiring that's in your house, right? The type of lights that are in your house. There's all kinds of things.
So that can all run interference when it comes to a Wi-Fi signal.
There's no real way to tell ahead of time unless you do a test. So with our modem up here, it's enough signal that it covers, because we have our modem upstairs, it covers the upstairs, but it doesn't fully cover downstairs. So I have 2 extra access points in the house at different parts of the house that help cover those gaps in signal. So that way you don't have a part of the house that isn't covered.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that, again, I can't really get into on this podcast. You have to map your house. You have to do some planning.
Yes, well, I guess you just test it too, right? You shoot out your Wi-Fi signal and you wander around your home and see if you've got a signal.
The easiest way to tell, yeah. So if I was up here, I'm going to have full signal. If I go to the opposite end of my house and I get my phone out and I can't hardly pick anything up, then that's a really good indicator that, I probably need to put something in somewhere else. Now, how do you do that? You run a hard line. That's the best way. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that. They have what's called meshing, where you can take an access point downstairs and hook it up, and it'll pick up on the signal from up here and rebroadcast it. But traditionally, you can only do that once. If you do it again, it cuts your bandwidth in half. And if you do it again, it cuts it in half again.
It almost sounds like a photocopier that every copy of a copy you make, it
gets worse.
It gets worse.
Yeah. So there are ways to do it, but traditionally, if you're going to run devices around your house, if possible, it's best to do it with hardline. Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about, we've covered the basics. We're going to talk about security on that network. Now, I get this question all the time. I used to have an IT business, so I would get this question a lot. Jonathan, I just bought a modem. I just got internet service in my house. Am I secure? Yes. Okay. by default, you have what's called NAT, which is Network Address Translation. So yes, your modem has an outside IP address to the world. If you go to whatismyip.com, you can actually see what that IP address is. Will people try to attack that address? Maybe. I mean, there's hackers out on the internet that randomly attack IP addresses all the time, but the IP address that's on the outside does not correlate to anything on the inside of your home. So by default, they cannot hit your outside IP address and get to anything in your house, right? In order for that to happen, you would have to mess with the settings on your firewall to allow things through, which I recommend you never do unless you're a business. And then if you're a business, that you know what you're doing.
Okay. Well, and you just mentioned firewall.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about what a firewall is?
Sure. That goes into the next thing. It's down the list. We'll go ahead and talk about it now. So what a firewall is it is a device that basically is like a wall. It stands between you and the internet, and you get to control what goes through the wall.
Sounds like a filter. Now, is this a piece of hardware or software, both?
It's kind of, again, that's one of those things that's kind of blurring these days with the new technologies that are coming out. But traditionally, yes, it's a hardware appliance. Is the best way to go.
And this plugs into the modem, or does this plug into the internet before it hits the modem?
No, what you would do, so your modem has to be first, right? Because your modem is what translates that signal from your internet service provider into an actual usable internet connection. Right. So the internet connection goes into the firewall. And then on the other side of the firewall is your home network, right? Your switches, your APs, your devices, everything.
Well, so the internet goes into the modem, and then the modem hooks into your switches and your firewall.
To your firewall first.
Oh, firewall first. Then switches.
Everything else hooks into the firewall, right? What that helps you do is it helps you do a couple of technologies that I'm fixing to talk about, and that is called VLANs and traffic routing. So I'm not going to get into a horrible, in the weeds explanation of these two technologies. There's tons of videos out there. If you guys want to have a better explanation of how to do this at home, I don't mind making a video on how to do these specific things, but we're just going to briefly cover them here. So what a VLAN is that's called a virtual local area network. Everything in your house has an IP address, right? So your IP address, I'm just going to give you an example. Your computer might be 192.168.1.1, right? Your printer might be 192.168.1.2, right? Those are two separate devices with two separate IP addresses. By default, those two can communicate with each other, right? The computer can talk to the printer can talk to the computer. What a virtual local area network, or a VLAN, does is your computer might be 192.168.1.1, and your printer might be the next octet, so 192.168.3.1, right? So you got 2.1 on your computer, 3.1 on the printer, unless you specifically set up rules in your firewall to allow those two subsets to communicate with each other. To say 2.1 can send traffic to 3.1 and 3.1 can send traffic to 2.1. They can't communicate. They are segregated. They are walled off in their own little garden, right? Now, of course, you don't want that on your printer and your computer, right? Because you want your printer to be able to talk to the computer and your computer to be able to send prints to the printer, right? But maybe you have other devices in your house that you don't want that. Maybe you have Internet of Things devices like security cameras, and you bought a door chime or a doorbell from this weird manufacturer that you don't know, or you've bought a smart outlet from a Chinese manufacturer that you've never heard of before, or whatever. Maybe you don't want those things talking to anything on your network because you don't want any chance of those devices hacking into other things in your network, right? So you would set up a rule in the firewall that says that device can only talk to the internet, but it can't talk to anything else on my network.
Makes sense. That sounds really complicated. I mean, it seems like it would almost be easier just to not have those type of devices.
So again, that's why we're talking about security.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't do this, right? Most businesses don't do this. Most businesses, if I walk in and I sit down with my iPad and I get an IP address, I can talk to everything on their network, and that's not a good idea,
I see.
right? The biggest thing is if something gets, so let's say you have a well-known brand of something sitting in your house. You trust it, it's great, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't get hacked. So if a third party were to hack them, then through their device, they have access to your network.
Right. So, I mean, could this be like these refrigerators I've heard of that are connected to the internet?
Refrigerators, microwaves. There was actually a story. I don't remember the specifics. You guys can look it up on Google, but I don't remember where this was. But there was a network that got hacked, and how they got in was through the Wi-Fi connection on the refrigerator.
Oh, my goodness.
Because the refrigerator was talking back and forth to the Wi-Fi network unsecurely. So it was sending the password to connect on your Wi-Fi network unencrypted. And you can use a sniffer on the network and you see the traffic go by and you see the password right there.
Huh, that's really scary.
Well, I mean, so again, I don't think it's so much scary because, again, you know, this is a rare thing that someone's going to hack a residential place, right? They might stumble across you just by scanning IP addresses, but you're not targeted, right? There's no gain there.
Right.
Most businesses, big businesses, are targeted because there's a gain that people can make by actually hacking in. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't always do good security practice.
Right.
Right.
And so this is like true hacking. This is not like when people are on Facebook and they're like, oh, I've been hacked, and they've actually just had somebody clone their account.
Yeah,
this is like this is like big time, like somebody has broken into the network of some major company and somehow gets your stuff because of
I've
that.
heard about security cameras being hacked into and them downloading the security footage from inside your house.
Yes. Well, and
Right.
I've heard of like even like software places being hacked. Like I think the most recent one I heard was LastPass, which is like a password
Yes.
management. I've heard of them getting hacked. And I've heard of the whole refrigerator thing before too, and that just freaked
Yeah.
me out. I was like, first of all, why on earth? But
Yeah, so
You know.
so the goal here is not to make you paranoid and not to make you, you know, huddle in your cave and protect yourself from everything you could possibly think of because you
Yes.
can't, right?
yes, but mainly
doing-
like if you've got this firewall and you've got the things directed where they won't communicate with other things.
Well, basically what we're doing is we're mitigating.
Yes, okay, that
Right.
makes sense.
We're mitigating the damage. So
yes.
let's talk about the security camera thing for a
Okay.
second, all right? So let's say you've done your VLANs, your security cameras can't talk to the internet. The only thing they can talk to is the recording. Like say you have a recording box somewhere in your house. that's
Okay, so you
recording
have
those
like a
cameras.
hard drive
Yeah,
that's recording, and
yeah.
that's the only thing they can talk to.
So that's the only thing they can talk to, right? That
Okay.
means that your cameras can't get attacked from the outside, right? Because they have no access to the internet. If for some reason you put a camera on your camera network that was already physically compromised, like it has some code built into it or whatever, right? Then once it's on your network, it can't communicate with anything else on your network other than the other security cameras.
Okay,
It can't get to your PC. It can't get to your, like if you have a storage array where you're storing all your files, it can't get there, right?
yeah, so it's like it's isolating it a little bit.
You're basically, and that's good. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to VLANs and good security practice is to isolate all your different groups of devices and only allow the groups of devices to talk to each other if that's what you need them to do for them to function.
That makes sense.
You're just plugging holes. All right. So traffic routing.
And of course, if you don't understand this stuff, definitely get somebody who can help you with this.
Yes, and we'll talk about that at the end.
Mhm, exactly.
So traffic routing is another one. So what traffic routing is basically that is monitoring where things go and what they do. So we talked about the camera situation, right? So let's say you had some devices on your network that you wanted them to be able to talk to the internet, right? And you know that XYZ camera is supposed to be talking to XYZ.com. What traffic routing does, it allows you to monitor the traffic flow in your network, and you could actually check to see if the traffic from that camera is actually going to XYZ.com. You might find out that, wait a minute, yeah, this camera is sending traffic to xyz.com, but it's also sending it to rst.com.
Okay, and that
And
could be a
they didn't
security.
disclose. Yeah, they didn't disclose that.
Yeah, so that could be a security.
So
breach.
and at that point, if it was me, I would pull that camera and not put it back on my network, right? Because they're doing something that they've not disclosed to you. So that's kind of what traffic routing is, right?
Makes sense.
So what are some good products to accomplish this? Now, I'm going to give you a couple of brand names. They're products that I'm not sponsored by them. And this is products that I've used in the past and I'm comfortable with. This is by no means the only product you can use. Just remember that whatever products you choose, make sure you always stay within your budget, and that if you need help, get a professional to help you install and configure these products. So when it comes to networking equipment, I love UniFi. They don't break the bank on price. They're solid pieces of equipment. That's what we use here. We have UniFi access points to do the Wi-Fi. I do not have yet, but I will be getting a UniFi switch and a UniFi firewall in order to do our firewalling here at the house. For business, they are also really good for business. The switches and the access points are great for small, medium, and even large businesses. When it comes to firewall, the firewall for UniFi is really good for small business and for home use. It is not good for large or medium-sized businesses. It just doesn't have the punch to handle the amount of network traffic that you'll probably have. For anything else above that, pfSense is a great way to go. pfSense is a software firewall that you can run on any hardware. So yes, you can go to pfSense and you can actually buy their hardware, but if you have an old server or something sitting around, you can actually put pfSense on it and get your firewall up and running. Those are both great to use in those circumstances. See, other things you can do, secure your home. So this is another list of things that you don't have to do, but it helps. We're going to talk about, blocking ads on websites. So you're bombarded by ads on websites these days. I don't know how many people have come to me saying, Jonathan, I've got a virus on my computer. I'm like, what do you mean you got a virus on your computer? It says, well, I've got this thing on my screen. It says I have a virus. It tells me to call this number to get help from Microsoft to remove the virus.
And that's a scam.
It's a scam.
Yes.
That's exactly right. You don't really have a virus. What happened was you were on a website and either the website wasn't a very legit one or the website might have got hacked and they put some code in there. What it is it's a pop-up. It's an ad, right? It takes up your full screen and it looks like you've been hacked, but you haven't. They're trying to get you to click it or call them to do something. So ad blockers, again, I'm not going to recommend a specific one. There's tons of really good ones out there. Just look up one that has good ratings. You can get them for every major browser, and those are always just good to have. Most of them can be turned on and off. So if you are on a website like your bank and you need to have like ads and pop-ups turned on so that you can do the different functions of that website, you can turn it off for that site and then turn it back on when you're done.
Now, these ad blockers, I mean, like when I think of ads, I think of different types of ads. Like some ads are like banner ads or side ads that are on the website, and then there are some that are pop-ups. Are you mainly talking about pop-ups, or does this block all ads? Okay.
It blocks them all. Now, again, you can say what you do and do not want blocked. There are some websites that will say you can't view our content. You have an ad blocker turned on.
Oh, okay.
And then I make the decision on if I want to turn it on or not. A lot of the times, if I'm on a news website and they say something like that, I'm like, you know what? I'll just go get my news article somewhere else. But if you want to support a site and they are ad supported, you are welcome to turn the ad blocker off, browse that website, turn it back on when you leave.
That makes sense.
Right.
So these ad blockers then will also block pop-ups.
Yes.
So you're saying it's important sometimes to turn those off, like if you're at a bank website or a credit card website where it requires a pop-up for
Correct.
you to log in? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, a lot of them do. Like if you checked on your, click on your checking account, it sometimes pops up and gives you, if there are certain websites where you have to have it turned off.
That makes sense.
And if it's your bank, it's a trusted website. You don't have to worry about that.
Yes. As long as you go directly to the bank website and you don't click on something that supposedly the bank sends you.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, my website, binaryatlas.com, I do have ads on there that help support the website. But I'm not going to sit there and tell you that you can't have a pop-up blocker or ad blocker turned on, because I understand where that comes from. So feel free to do that. But there are some websites that will absolutely deny you access to the website if you have it.
Okay, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the next thing on the list is make sure you have an antivirus program and make sure it is up to date. So again, I'm not going to go through the giant long list of different antivirus softwares that are out there and which one I think you should or should not use, right? But one that I think you should definitely, if you have a Windows computer, it is built into Windows. It's called Windows Defender. Go ahead and use that and make sure it's always up to date.
Okay. Now, I've heard in the past that if you were using an Apple computer or a Mac, as some people call it, that you didn't even need antivirus. Is that still true?
Yes and no. So viruses are few and far between for Mac, because when you take a pie chart of all the computers in the world, the Mac is still a very slim portion compared to the number of Windows computers out there. So if a hacker wants to target as many machines as possible, they're going to make that virus for Windows, right? That does not mean that they don't exist for Mac or that you might not run across one, but you're much less likely to.
Makes sense.
And again, all the major providers, they all have antivirus software. There's a lot of good ones for Mac too. Now, again, I'm not going to go into individuals. We don't have the time on this podcast for that. That might be something to do a YouTube video on in the future, but just make sure you have something. Something is better than nothing. Okay. The next thing is do not open email attachments from people you don't know, right?
Or businesses.
Or businesses you don't know. Basically, if you get an email attachment, do not download it to your computer and open it if it looks suspect in any way, shape, or form. Okay. Now, a lot of people don't have to worry about this too much, because if they use a service like Google Gmail or Microsoft Outlook, Outlook.com, and you're using it in the web browser, those services do a really good job of scanning email and attachments for viruses before they even show up in your inbox, right? But if you've got a email software like Apple Mail or the Outlook program on your computer, and you're actually downloading those emails to your computer, do not open attachments if they're suspect in any way, shape, or form, right? All right, the next one would be never give out information such as credit card information or personal information in an email. So let's say a rich prince from Nigeria emails you, and to claim an inheritance, all you have to do is send them your credit card number,
to pay the taxes, to pay the inheritance.
Whatever,
don't do that.
Don't. You should never give out critical information over an email. Email is not secure. Okay. If you do business with somebody and they need payment, they're going to take that payment through a secure portal or website or some way to get that information that is secure.
Yes, they're not going to ask you to email them your credit card number or your social security number.
Now, this one's probably going to be a hot topic. I'm probably going to get some flack for it. But if you can, try to avoid Chinese products on your network. And I'm not talking about made in China. There's a lot of companies that have their stuff made in China, but there's a lot of companies that the company is based in China. And there has been a lot of talk in the tech industry over the last few years about whether we can trust technology made in China, right? There's been a lot of security experts that have found a lot of Chinese hardware, like I said earlier, sending traffic to sites that was never specified, right? Communicating with servers over in China when they're not supposed to be, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into the geopolitical argument on that. I'm just going to tell you that if you do get Chinese products, make sure that you put them on a secure VLAN, and that you monitor the traffic on them to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do.
That's right. Well, I mean, the same is true with any product. If it's not from a big name brand that you've heard of, make sure that you're being diligent to check on it, because
exactly.
There are so many brands out there, and it's hard to know who you can trust.
All right, guys. So that's pretty much it for the podcast today. I hope everyone enjoyed learning a little bit about what makes up a home network and how you can properly secure it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave comments on the podcast down below. We're also going to put a link to the show notes onto our website. So if you're on our website reading the show notes, you're welcome to put comments there if you have any questions. As always, please visit our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@binaryatlas. And we're also on all the social media channels. You can look us up. So this is Jonathan
Brandy.
and we hope to see you guys next time.